Hello there, Alan. Welcome back to another episode of Friends. My name is Generation Tech. Nailed it. One of the biggest controversies amongst the Star Wars fandom is the age-old debate about just how competent the Stormtrooper Corps is. I actually think they're highly misrepresented, and they're actually a bit more competent than people give them credit for, especially when it comes to their equipment. Now, you guys know I'm going to be one of the first individuals out there to say that the Empire's cultural, political, and economic system was pure trash. The fact that Palpatine managed to stay in power for 24 years was a miracle, and mostly thanks to the solid foundation set up by the Galactic Republic's rule over the previous tens of thousands of years. And also, the clones individually are clearly better trained than their Stormtrooper counterparts. It's not really all that close. If you see in our last video where we pit a company of clones versus a company of Stormtroopers, you'll know that there are a lot of different factors outside of training that determines who wins a battle. But where I draw the line is when people say that Stormtrooper armor is complete trash and that somehow Clone Trooper armor is amazing and much better. If anything, I think Phase 2 Clone Trooper armor is very similar to Stormtrooper armor. And if anything, the Stormtrooper armor even has an edge in many different categories.
You guys know that I love slow-cooked Ewok cheeks more than anything in the galaxy. But ever since the second Death Star fell on their planet, something that the New Republic is trying to cover up, it's been relatively hard for me to get my hands on those scrumptious little guys. Luckily, I found an alternative to sweet Ewok cheeks, and that's Porkbun.com, our sponsor for today's video. If you're looking for a new domain name for a website and you want the lowest prices possible, you gotta check them out. They have over 500 domain extensions, from the more common ones like .com, .shop, and .app to far more specific ones like .baby, .house, or .dentist, and so many more. I actually had a blast thinking up of potential combinations for websites. Every domain name at Porkbun.com comes with tons of freebies like SSL certificates, WHOIS, privacy, DNS, URL forwarding, and hosting trials. Because why pay for things that should be free? All of these features and tools are backed by incredible support 365 days a year and more 5-star reviews on Trustpilot from real customers than anyone else. Check out our link for Porkbun.com in the description down below and use our promo code GENTECH24, that's all caps, and get $1 off with your next domain from Porkbun and see why they're the best domain registrar around. Thank you for your patience. On to the rest of the video.
So I'm going to be showing you guys a series of clips from HoloNet series where basically this whole myth started. I believe the creators of these shows have a huge bias against the Empire and fully exercise their creative license when making these shows that are honestly more like soft propaganda rather than a true retelling of the events. You guys know I love the Republic, but I believe the truth is far more important. Now, in this first scene, it's a pretty famous scene, we get this idea that somehow Stormtrooper helmets have very poor visibility.
Wow, you really do shoot like a Stormtrooper. Guess I don't have too much to worry about.
This helmet! I can't see!
So a bit of context, the guy with the beard, that's an old Clone Wars veteran, specifically Captain Rex. He served in the 501st Battalion underneath Anakin Skywalker. He clearly has a huge bias against the Empire for a variety of different reasons. For one, he managed to resist Order 66 and he had his inhibitor chip taken out. And so he was actually conscious when this whole terrible ordeal happened. He and Ahsoka Tano would have to wipe out an entire group of clones. Clones that Captain Rex grew up with, trained with, fought alongside for his entire life basically. I mean, this was completely traumatic for him, and this was all caused mainly because of Emperor Palpatine. Rex would then spend the next few years setting up an underground clone resistance movement against the Empire in order to provide safe haven for clones who became awoken to the situation.
Come with me if you want to live.
Captain Rex also saw the Empire phase the clones out with the Imperial Defense Recruitment Bill by replacing them with TK Troopers, aka the precursors of the Stormtrooper. To make matters worse, the Empire backed out on the bill's promised provision to provide living arrangements and pensions for the retired clones.
Help a veteran get a warm meal.
And so Captain Rex hates everything that has to do with the Stormtroopers, and it goes way beyond just nostalgia for some old body armor and helmets and, some personal preferences. This was very personal.
For the record, this wasn't my idea.
Just try to act like a professional.
What if you get in there and forget whose side you're on?
I would never be on their side or wear their junk armor.
And so, yeah, from the second that Captain Rex puts this uniform on, he's unhappy, as would anyone if they had to put on the uniform of their oppressor. You also have to consider that the clones, especially with Phase 2 armor, wore almost custom-fit pieces of gear. And so the armor smiths at Kamino could afford to make these suits of armor fit perfectly to the clones' arm and leg length, their torso width. For any of you guys who have ever gotten a bespoke suit made, the fit makes everything a lot more comfortable and you look a lot nicer. It's a lot better than that 3 sizes too large suit you got off the rack from Marshall's for your first job.
Mr. Huff, under your references, you listed Dale Doback, which I know is this gentleman, but you also listed Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. Yeah, we are looking for people we can contact.
And so I think it's really important to understand that Rex does not want to put this body compression suit on from a Stormtrooper who's probably sweaty and smelly and most likely pee-peed or poo-pooed after he was knocked out.
This garbage is nothing like clone armor.
Looks a little tight on you, old man.
Yeah, or at least I know how to wear it.
And yeah, as an older individual who's a little bit rounder, this is also not going to fit him, because even the Stormtroopers, although they came in, a bigger variety of sizes than the clones did, there were some standardizations, some requirements for height and weight. And I don't think an older clone trooper is going to fit those requirements. The Stormtroopers were kind of obsessed with making their military force look as uniform as the clones. This was all about being imposing and scaring people into obedience. And so let's go back to the scene where Captain Rex throws his helmet off and then complains about not being able to see through the visor. What people forget about this scene is the scene that happens right before this.
Chopper?
You see, Ezra Bridger's lightsaber has a really cool hybrid design. It has a stun round built into it. It's non-lethal unless you're using it against droids. But what these ionized stun rounds can do is take out any electrical systems or equipment that you have on your body. And what we don't see in a lot of the holofilms is just how high-tech these helmets were, both the Clone Trooper helmets and the Stormtrooper helmets. They were just chock full of batteries and processing units and display screens. So these Clone Trooper Phase 1 helmets were just a first-generation design. One of the special things about these helmets was that it had a life support system built in, and these helmets could be pressurized for short periods of time to be used in vacuum or in toxic environments where a trooper could be poisoned. Both Phase 2 and Stormtrooper helmets had more similar filter systems built in and additional breathing apparatuses that could be put over the mouth, as it was deemed not necessary to make these helmets pressurized. All of these helmets also had tracking devices that fed unit movement and locations to a battlefield management system. There was also internal display systems for information for the soldiers. But Phase 1 helmets were actually really not great when it came to visibility because of how the visor was built. And one of the big updates for Phase 2 was increasing the visor's visibility. Interestingly enough, Rex has a modified helmet with a Phase 1 visor, which should in theory have less visibility. The Stormtrooper helmet would close up the center area of the visor quite a bit for additional protection. But there was also a much more advanced heads-up display that should have made things easier when it came to seeing your environment, or at least understanding what was in your environment. The visor would polarize whenever a weapon was fired, for instance. There were also motion sensors that alerted the Stormtrooper of any movement around them. And also there was targeting data fed directly from the Stormtrooper's weapon to the helmet, making their accuracy much greater. And here's the thing, Clone Trooper helmets were quite modular, and you could attach all sorts of things like night vision goggles on them or a rangefinder, but the Stormtrooper helmets had a lot of things built in already. And it makes sense that the Stormtrooper helmets would be, at least a slight upgrade from previous generations. Material costs, manufacturing techniques usually get better over time instead of getting worse, and if you look at how much money was spent into basically creating this massive military-industrial complex, it makes sense that the Empire would be able to do these things. And it also really doesn't make sense for the Empire to design a helmet that didn't work, that didn't allow their troopers to see. And so as far as that whole joke about Stormtroopers not being able to hit anything, well, do you guys remember what Ben Kenobi said in the first movie?
And these blast points, too accurate for sand people. Only Imperial stormtroopers are so precise.
Kenobi might be old and gray here, but we all know about his experience during the Clone Wars. This guy was one of the best generals in the Grand Army of the Republic, and one thing you don't forget is what it's like to take enemy fire, and what the aftermath of that is. Kenobi recognizes that whoever shot these Jawas had very tight groupings, a sign of a well-trained shooter. And yes, he's gone up against Stormtroopers himself just a few years earlier and barely escaped with his life on multiple occasions. So then why do we see all of this horrendously inaccurate shooting in the rest of A New Hope? Well, that all occurs on the Death Star. And my theory here is that Tarkin had a plan all along. He wanted the rebels to escape on purpose, an escape that was kind of ridiculous if you think about it, even by Star Wars standards. One does not simply walk into a Death Star and then just make it out alive like that. And remember guys, just hours before Tarkin had blown up the entire planet of Alderaan, a politically and culturally powerful world, in an attempt to get Princess Leia to give up the secret location of the rebel base. If he was willing to murder that many people for that information, why is it so hard to believe that he would let a few rebels think that they can escape the Death Star?
Are they away?
They've just made the jump into hyperspace.
You're sure the homing beacon is secure aboard their ship? I'm taking an awful risk, Vader. This had better work.
Those Stormtroopers probably could have easily ended Luke and Leia's life right then and there, but it's clear they were under orders to let the rebels go. From the second the Stormtroopers inspected the Falcon when it landed, they had already planted a homing beacon on this ship, and the Death Star ends up following that homing beacon to Yavin 4. It's a big brain move by Tarkin, although he should have deployed those TIE fighters the second the rebels launched their trench run on his battle station. That was a little bit arrogant. So as you can see, these helmets aren't terrible. They're quite effective. Stormtroopers might seem kind of like buffoons in the Rebels series, but that's also a cartoon and soft propaganda. I mean, read the novels, look at the expanded universe, look at Andor, or look at Rogue One. My personal favorite is the novel Twilight Company. It really details the actual performance of these Stormtroopers, and they are very much an elite and fanatic force of soldiers. Their tactics and strategic thinking might be a little predictable at times, but their aim was on par with their rebel counterparts. Okay, now let's move on to this other complaint that Kanan Jarrus, a former Jedi, and Captain Rex have.
This armor doesn't protect you from anything.
Well, I told you.
But it seems like Captain Rex forgot that he used a very similar stun round to help Ahsoka Tano escape Order 66, and he had put down more than his fair share of clones wearing that supposedly better armor. Stun rounds typically go through thinner armor. I mean, I think clone commandos can take a few more shots. Maybe someone who's wearing the Scar can also take a little bit more damage, but standard Clone Trooper armor and Stormtrooper armor both are very susceptible to a ion blast. Now in Rex's defense, his armor uses a breastplate from a Phase 1 Clone Trooper armor suit, and that was known to be a bit tougher and stiffer than what was used for Phase 2 armor, depending on who you ask. In general, Captain Rex was always an out-of-the-box kind of thinker. I mean, the fact that he mixes and matches his armor is quite cool, but I would also say that his criticisms against Stormtrooper armor are pretty similar to his criticisms against Phase 2 Clone Trooper armor. He just doesn't like that variant for one reason or another. It could be aesthetic, it could be nostalgic. Ultimately, Clone Trooper armor and Stormtrooper armor are almost identical in the materials used, and the design is also quite similar. You have an insulated bodysuit and roughly around 20 form-fitted lightweight plastoid alloy composite plates. If anything, according to the white papers on this matter, Phase 2 armor plates were lighter and stronger than Phase 1, and generally Phase 2 could withstand multiple impacts and also withstand heat better. But Phase 2 plates apparently didn't do as well against certain more powerful blaster rounds. And Stormtrooper armor is supposed to be pretty robust. I mean, we see a lot of Stormtroopers go down from a glancing blow, but what really is happening is the thermal energy is being dispersed all across their body, and that usually knocks them out, but it keeps them alive, which is important. And so yeah, no matter how incompetent the Empire might seem at times, no matter how bad their political and economic policies were, Palpatine did build a very robust military-industrial complex. And as a military first leader, you'd think that he would get the basics right, like create armor and helmets that were both functional and cheap to mass produce. I think we have to give the Empire at least credit for that. And it's not like the Stormtrooper armor came out of nowhere, guys. It originated from Clone Trooper armor designs. Like I said, Phase 2 Clone Trooper armor is more similar to Stormtrooper armor than it is to Phase 1 in some very clear ways. And so if you're going to criticize Stormtrooper armor, you're going to have to criticize Clone Trooper armor, because I don't think there's that much difference. And I'm going to believe that assessment much more than an old Clone Trooper who hates the Empire, and also a Jedi who hates the Empire. They're a bit too biased, in my opinion. Well, let me know in the comment section below what you guys think about all this. Also, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest for awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic.
To democracy!